We would like to thank the University of Melbourne Energy Institute, our Zero Carbon Australia project partners for this great venue, which we use every month. For the people who haven't been to one of our discussion groups before, PZE is a climate solutions think tank and research organisation. Our goal is to transform Australia from a 19th century fossil fuel-based economy to a 21st century renewable powered clean tech economy. Our projects include the Zero Carbon Australia research, Repower Australia talks, media work, education programs, and much more. We're always looking for more volunteers, so if you come to us afterwards and want to get involved, please do. The discussion group is a forum for climate change solutions with presentations by experts in their field and is held on the first Monday of every month. My name is Anthony Daniel. I'm involved with the Beyond Zero Emissions radio show, which is also a podcast, which has a lot of great content. Most of it is with local people who have got interesting things with entrepreneurs and people doing research. So please give that a look if you'd like, and ask me later if you'd like to know more details on that. Tonight though, we welcome Dan Cass. Dan is a strategist at the Australian Institute and honorary associate at the Sydney Business School. He has advised energy companies, politicians and NGOs. Dan will be speaking about his recent report titled Securing Renewables, How Batteries Solve the Problem of Clean Electricity. Lithium battery prices have fallen a massive 93% between 1995 and 2014, which threatens coal and gas generators with competition, and Australian networks are already testing large-scale batteries storage. 1.5 million Australian households have invested in rooftop solar on their homes, and this research shows that over 80% of those households are considering buying batteries to boost their array. Let's welcome Dan.
Thanks, Anthony, and thank you, BZE. It's a bit of a trip down memory lane to be here because I studied science at the University of Melbourne in the 18th century or thereabouts, and came over here because global warming was an issue, which of course we had to rename climate change, but the science is there. And I studied planetary climatology in this building. And it's a strange road after a quarter of a century that there are still some people denying the evidence of science, but hopefully we can entice them over with the wonders of renewables and clean energy, which is one of the few things that makes me a climate optimist still. And it's great to be here speaking to BZE because you really were one of the first groups in the world to look at renewables in a really clear light and make clear to the public that they could handle energy generation and then transport. And I was a little bit involved with the Stationary Energy Plan in 2010 and helped you launch it in Canberra to the press gallery and politicians, and refereed the original report. In fact, I think I've got the first one that was printed. I think I've got it autographed by some of the volunteers in the office, and probably Mark and Matt, sitting on my bookshelf at home. And it really was quite a breakthrough report, I think. You were at the cutting edge. So briefly a bit about me. I'm not an engineer, so go easy on the technical questions about exothermic reactions in lithium batteries and so on. I'm a strategist with the Australia Institute. I'm an associate at the Sydney Business School looking at shared value and wind and really the politics of climate transition. And I'm involved with Solar Head of State, which is a small non-profit trying to put solar panels on the roofs of heads of state as a symbolic gesture. We're doing St Lucia in a month. And I'm involved with the Deborah Cass Prize for Writing in memory of my sister, who was a law academic. And I put Greenhouse Action Australia here because I was involved in Greenhouse Action Australia, which was the first climate action group in the country in 1991. And they were interesting days because there was bipartisan support around the science. And I'll get back to that a little bit later because I think this is the thing that's so exciting about renewables. They can bring us back to a climate, as it were, where politicians from both sides of the aisle can agree on something and do something that's quite significant. So, battery storage technology. The technology of whose time? So on the left, Alessandro Volta, demonstrating the battery to Napoleon, 1801. Fairly primitive battery, the first, in fact. And then on the right, a quote from The Economist this year. The lithium-ion battery, says The Economist, is the technology of our time. I think it is possibly the technology of the time, and I'll get to why I think that a bit later, and it's got to do with the politics as well as the technology of energy and climate. A little bit about the context we're in. We're in a fairly heated debate about energy, as you would have all known, being in the field and following the trends and seeing the arguments in the papers. Some newspapers have been very concerned that there is an energy crisis in South Australia. And the blame has been apportioned to all sorts of factors. Wind, gas prices, the structure of the NEM, the National Energy Objective, rapidly gets very complex for most people to understand and very complex for experts. I mean, I frequently get confused by the claims and counterclaims in this kind of debates. But overall, I'm optimistic that it is solvable, as BZE showed, I think, with the first stationary energy report. And the progress in battery technology makes it even more solvable than it was when you first did that work in 2010. I think that the thing that makes batteries so important is that they solve what we think at the Institute is the last objection to renewables. And I want to clarify that we are not over-egging the problem of variability, and I would understand, you know, a lot of what BZE's position is on this. It's not some terrible crisis where every solar panel has to be backed up by baseload. So the problem is exaggerated vastly, but variability is something that needs management, and batteries are increasingly able to do that in a cost-effective way. And the reason why I think that has so much political potential is it's really the last objection to going clean energy. So cost curves have made renewables cheap and cheaper than conventional energy in many markets and many applications. But battery storage is suddenly now becoming one of these technologies at a tipping point where it can suddenly enable really profound change. So a few quotes from people you may or may not have heard of. Prime Minister John Howard, 2007, "You either run them, power stations, on the way they run now. It's predominantly coal or gas or sometimes hydro, or you run them in the future with nuclear." And, you know, I think John Howard really saw the chance of a bit of a culture war around this. He was very good at playing these divide and rule games, and I think with renewables he took a clear punt that clean coal and nuclear were real and baseload, but renewables were this scary thing and we couldn't really do it yet until someone invents a breakthrough. Then there's subsequent quotes from others, other figures from the coalition explaining that there's a lemming-like desire, lemming-like, to go to renewables in this country. And, you know, I don't laugh ultimately because they are reflecting community concerns. People don't want the lights to go out. So I think, you know, we need to respect the concern and then explain why our solution really is viable. I'm sure you'll know these data well. This is from Lazard. But just to remind us what BZE's been saying for a long time, there's no magic silver bullet that suddenly makes renewable energy this amazing technology, a la the Bill Gates theory of change. It's learning by doing and building. So, you know, the Swanson effect and so on in solar and similar trends in wind, incredible pace of change. And no magic bullet, no amazing eureka moments, just doing and learning and building and improving the technology all the time. So this, you know, for me is the silver lining of the climate gloom of the past 2 decades. You know, the trends in climate science have got more dire. The progress of renewables is remarkable. And then this is a graph from the report, and just so you know, most of the data I'll be putting up is from the report, and almost everything is publicly available. The only thing that's novel that we did research on is the opinion polling. And we include all the data in the report, so you can download the graphs and so on. So that's our research contribution to the debate. We did some national polling questions, which I'll get to. So this is a graph that shows predictions for power capacity and annual revenue in storage. This is already a little bit out of date. You know, IRENA figures, very bullish figures subsequently in the Bloomberg New Energy Finance New Energy Outlook that came out just a couple of months ago. They're predicting, I think, a $250 billion market in storage in US dollars by 2040, unsubsidised. So storage is becoming effective, it's getting cheaper, and it's rolling out quite rapidly. The question then is, what kind of storage and for what applications, and how do we make it grow. Now, I've included this. It's a great graph from AECOM. They did a significant study for ARENA, and this I just think is a really useful snapshot, again as a non-engineer, trying to understand the breadth and range of applications and capacities and so on. So I'll spend just a little bit of time on this because I know that you'll appreciate the richness of the information here. Capacity on the horizontal axis, discharge time on the vertical, and then this really nifty use of different colours, I think, that really helps you see in quite a quick way where the technologies find their niche. And it's very general, and I'm sure experts will argue ad infinitum about the details and the edges of these, but pumped hydro storage right up at bulk power, mega capacity, hours long discharge and recharge processes, and then right down the opposite corner, the supercapacitors and flywheels. And a couple of years ago I had the pleasure of going to the next DC data centre. I don't know if any of you have been there. It's the first, I think, solar powered data centre in the Pacific. It's down around Fisherman's Bend. They've got a pretty significant solar array, but the really cool thing is they've got a great energy management system internally, including a flywheel. And I think they said that when it's at full speed, it can store enough power to keep the centre online for something like 20 or 30 seconds if there's a blackout, by which time the fast response gas generator, gas or diesel generator has kicked on, so they can keep the power up the whole time. So an amazing range of technologies. Compressed air energy storage, not sure how cost effective it is, but really interested to see lots of developments in that. Of all these batteries, the one that we focused on for this report, not to the exclusion of everything, but just because we had to do a fairly nifty job of keeping minimal research time, because I only had about 10 days of research and writing to get the first draft out. We focused on lithium-ion batteries, really because they are the one that can do quite a diverse range of applications, but in particular rooftop solar. And we'll get to why I think that's important, not just technologically, but politically. So it's a really great graph, and the AECOM report is excellent, I think. I really commend it to you. I think household storage is the biggest disruptor because it goes straight to the consumer. And I'm not in any way disregarding the importance of the power towers, for example. The BZE was really the first to champion in this country. So concentrated solar thermal with molten salt storage, incredibly important technology, absolutely crucial. We should be researching and trying and using it without a doubt. But I think there's real evidence that it's at the edge of the grid, as they say, that we'll get the most value. And it's partly because of the economic value of the stored energy, because the consumer is paying the most expensive energy in the system, but also because the consumer is able to buy their own infrastructure, on the credit card or with the superannuation money, not waiting for governments to dilly-dally and argue and have hissy fits about variability, but just go out and do it. But also then because they are stakeholders in the future. And I think this is a really crucial lesson that perhaps we've underplayed. We thought that the argument would be entirely one on the evidence, but there's a bit of a, I don't know what you call it, postmodern thing going on in politics where emotion seems this important and evidence is down in the carpet. And if someone's saving money with solar and storage and then the government comes and slaps some horrendous usage charge or fixed daily charge on them and gets their back up, I'm not for conflict, but that is a useful lesson for the politicians to get a bit of bite back and then have to reverse their policy decisions, as the WA government did with the feed-in tariff cuts the last state election. So I'm in furious agreement with ARENA saying the use of batteries for self-consumption could revolutionise the electricity system. I really think all of this is part of this energy transition, but I think it really is true that the solar storage piece at the domestic level is incredibly significant. And then I have a quote from Ali Nourai from DNVGL. Grid edge story means potential to offer more value by bundling multiple services. And I'll get back to this. I'm not an energy economist, but I want to talk briefly at the end about stacked services methodology for valuing storage, because I think it's quite a crucial approach. Here's some data from Bloomberg, which I've converted into a price difference, so taking export tariff and residential consumption price in the states and territories. And this is in the report, really just to show what you would know well, that people are paying vast amounts for electrons that come from the retailer and getting very paltry amounts for the electrons that come out of their solar system and get fed into the grid. And as we know, the electrons are as competent, those ones that come out of the PV. They're just as tough as the big heroic ones that come from the baseload generators down in the valley. And I think this is an explosive policy problem that over the course of this year, many, many tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of householders will be losing their feed-in tariffs and getting quite a rude shock when they realise there are two prices for electrons. And there was a piece, I think yesterday in The Guardian by Michael Slezak that started to raise this issue, and also one in the Saturday paper by Mike Seckham, and I really commend both to you. I think they're great pieces that start to grapple with the political constituency for rooftop solar, and hopefully soon rooftop solar coupled with storage. Just briefly, I wanted to mention, what I'm sure you'll know, that storage, batteries and other forms of storage can have high value in many different functions on the grid. And when we start looking at the different markets in the NEM, so beyond the electrons, I'm not the engineer, I've probably already got it wrong, but beyond the energy, the reactive power, the frequency control, ancillary services and so on. I know it seems all obscure and I find it impenetrably complicated, the technology and the economics of ancillary services, but I think it is really important, and the Rocky Mountain Institute have a great methodology, which I'll get to a bit later, where they start trying to work out how we can bundle together in a stack all the different value that you get from different storage technologies. But generally speaking, there are several big application markets. Peaker replacement, and we've seen that, I think, starting to enter into the debate in South Australia. People are starting to look at the whole problem of peakers going offline because gas is more valuable to just sell and flog off than to keep in storage for the times when the electricity price bumps up to the statutory maximum. Network investment deferral, huge political problem. And I think we'll be aware, Josh Frydenberg, the new Minister for Environment and Energy, heading to a COAG meeting to deal with this so-called energy crisis, will no doubt have had some briefings about network investment and the gold plating of the grid, which was so unnecessary. And again, good on BZE, were the first group, almost the first people at all in the country, along with the Melbourne Energy Institute, to warn about this several years ago, that it was just absolutely throwing good money after bad to keep supplementing and gold plating these networks for an outdated model. Demand charge management, particularly important in America, where I think in different markets there are very, very high charges for peak demand, particularly California because of the big blackouts and energy crisis they had there. And that's where one of the RMI case studies is really instructive, that you bundle together that value plus the behind-the-meter benefits of storage, and it can become cost-effective very, very quickly to spend quite a lot of money on storage for even small commercial and residential consumers. Ancillary services, again, incredibly complex, but I think we need to start putting it on the agenda, and we need to start selling the advantages of storage, not just that it can do what baseload can do, but it can do it better. So there was one statistic from Unicos in Germany. Their studies of their big, very big, multi-megawatt hour installations of storage, batteries, showed that their response times for frequency services were 3,000 times faster than the conventional services being offered in the German market. And as a non-engineer, that makes sense. A bunch of computers and a bunch of batteries could respond much quicker than some huge turbine, no matter how sophisticated its control technologies are. And then diesel microgrids, and again, Australia, I think, is at the cutting edge, ironically, even in the mining sector. So the mining companies who might have been arguing against the great big new tax and wanting to stay out of carbon markets, so they're rushing into some fantastic distributed energy, renewable energy solutions, because shipping in diesel is expensive. So again, props to Rocky Mountain Institute energy storage, they say, can generate much more value when multiple stack services are provided by the same device or fleet. I think, again, it's a really interesting issue, and perhaps that's something BZE or the Australia Institute can work on here as we push the new minister to get on board this revolution. So here's some of the basic research that we did. So we did some polling, several questions, national samples of 1,000 plus, so the standard 3% plus or minus, error bar. And this is a comparison between Morgan Stanley research on the left and our research on the right. More or less the same questions. Morgan Stanley were asking in 2015 and we were asking in February this year. How interested are you in storage? And you can see the dark blue line increasing to about 2/3 of people, very interested in storage. So a significant and statistically valid increase over 2015, which is not bad for a geeky technology that's not really ubiquitous and proven yet. And, perhaps it's Tesla and the sort of sexy Powerwall, or perhaps it's just the solar homeowners being really hungry to understand how they can cut that price of power and make the most of their system. But Australians seem very keen to jump on this revolution. So that, I think, is incredibly important politically and in policy terms. Another question that we asked was about motivations to go storage. And I put this up because, BZE's got the whole picture in its view, from the problem with climate science, the need to go beyond zero to suck the emissions out of the atmosphere and stabilise global temperatures, right through to the technological solutions and making them clear and accessible. And I love this, that of course the bottom line is the biggest, saving money on electricity bills, and you can't blame people for wanting to save money. Power prices are rising, economic uncertainty is real, so that's not a problem. I see that not as a negative at all. In fact, it's an advantage because our technology can save them money. But isn't it great? Reducing pollution from coal and gas power stations, almost 50%. And maybe I'm a pessimist, but I would not have guessed that was as popular an option in Australia, at this time. And then the one that will be interesting politically for the companies and in terms of their marketing, independence from energy companies, third from the top, almost 40% say that's what they want. And then even more frightening, higher up, disconnecting from the grid altogether, going bareback, going crazy, unplugging. A quarter of people are thinking about it. And again, I find that amazing when you think no one wants unreliable electricity from a battery you've got to kick and a generator you've got to start and things you don't understand. So the fact that 1 in 4 people is already considering it, to me means this is a mainstream trend now, storage batteries. And again, I think that's so important for BZE because a lot of what you say is complicated and people can't get it. This is an issue that's really hip pocket, and I'm not sure what the word is. It appeals to people's sense of being ripped off and wanting to just fix something and take something into their own hands, which is a great thing. And then here's a question which again I think gives us really some hope. This was a question asking people what kinds of policies they were interested in. I can't remember the exact question. What party would you consider voting for a party that's put forward these policies? So investing in large-scale solar and wind, much more likely, 26%. Installing solar on every home, 28%. Gradual transition to 100% renewables, much more likely, 24%. And then some with more likely 63. So almost 2/3 of people wanting to see Australia transition to renewables by 2030, which is actually a pretty stunning result. I mean, when you think, when BZE first came out with this idea that it could be done and should be done quickly, it seemed pretty crazy, and now you have 2/3 of the community pretty much on side. Maybe not the timeline you want, but it's pretty good. 2030 is, in infrastructure terms, that's today, right? For 25, 30-year assets, that's today. So then the bottom line, helping solar consumers get battery storage so the power they generate can be used around the clock, 71%. And I think that is just magnificent. So 3/4 of people really want political parties in this country to advance the cause of distributed solar and storage. So I think we are in the mainstream. It's a matter of convincing the politicians that this is ready to go. So briefly, I will move on to Rocky Mountain's methodology and then wrap up from me and take questions from you, because I'm keen to hear your views about all of this and in more. So this is taken from Rocky Mountains Institute studies published last year, I think. There's two, you should download both. There's an appendix of technical studies and case studies as well as the main report. They are saying that there are 13 services. They've divided them up according to stakeholder groups. It's quite a nifty chart. I think there's a lot of information in there. So customers on the left, the orange segment, so backup power right at the top at 11 o'clock, increased PV self-consumption at 10 o'clock, demand charge reduction, which again is a big deal, particularly in California, time of use bill management, the dreaded smart meters, and then as you go around, there's utility services, so the things that we had on the slide from earlier on, and then ISO RTO services, so a bunch of things that the networks are paying for already, and paying for and getting from baseload generators who are probably not delivering it as cheaply as storage will be able to soon. So that's that categorisation of where all the services lie, and then what they do in their case studies, and I think this is really interesting, they show you what it's like if you could stack up the value, and they're trying to be realistic about what the value really is for each of these services. So again, the different colours indicate the service and where it fits within the whole grid. So right at the edge user, or up at the grid, or up at the transmission end, so black starts and so on, and then in the network itself, the distribution business. So this particular case study was for a hotel, I think, and it's quite a sizable installation of batteries and control systems and so on, a huge solar rig, and it found that the cost was pretty significant, but the stacked service value was enough to make it cost effective immediately. And as we saw with solar panels, once the economics make sense in this abstract, you can quickly provide the finance by creating the finance structures like the PPAs and the what's the other term, the lease models, where people can get the kit in their house or in the factory for nothing down and pay it off against the savings that the technology delivers over the long term, plus the cost of capital and so on. So even if it's a big capital cost, if you know the revenue is there and it's going to make it cost effective, you can start installing this even without subsidy and active government policy. The issue though is being able to charge for the stacked services, and in the NEM here that's a real problem where almost everything batteries can do can't be paid for. So we really are very limited here, and that's a very complicated regulatory debate that I think we between us need to start thinking how we edge into this. So I'm not presenting this work as our own, this is all from RMI, but I think it's really worth you looking at if you haven't already. It's for me a really visually clear and compelling report about how we create how we add up the value that battery and other forms of storage can provide straight away to make it cost effective. So thank you very much. I hope that was useful. As I said, it's mostly a survey of publicly available research except for the polling, which is in the report, and happy to share that with BZE because you're championing the same things. So securing renewables is the report. This is hyperlinked, so in theory if we put this on the website, we'll pop it on ours perhaps. You can download the report and also link through to the references for the other things, the Lazard study and the RMI report and so on. So thank you very much for listening. Very keen to get questions. I'll write them down. Forgive me if they're a bit too technical, but I'll do my best. Thank you very much. Start at the back.
Oh, thank you. Just if you go back to the page before, I think you're pretty much onto it, and I just call out the fact that all these are well understood benefits. Some are externalities to the systems that we currently have, and some are at great risk of being privatised.
Right.
And I think what you're pointing to, and what's really interesting for a country like Australia, is that some of the capital costs in the black line that you've got on the right-hand side are actually bigger than that. And that is the capital cost in the existing network, the RAD base that we have to pay for in the future despite technology changing. And I really get scared that this debate is so far behind where the real investment is, because everyone's now working at privatising those colours on the left.
Right.
Right? The companies that are at play and the investment that's being considered at the moment is about privatising the left so that the right-hand side costs people more. Whether it's the incapacity for you to share the battery with your neighbour because there's a monopoly right to distribution that's accruing to the distribution networks, or whether it's the privatisation of the externalities that we created. I really think you need to get going faster, because I suspect that most of the benefits will be privatised in the next 5 years.
Right.
So
look, I think that's it's a huge issue and it's a huge risk. And what I find frustrating is I think that I'm a proponent of socially owned infrastructure. But if you privatise, at least have proper regulation. And in America, there are some jurisdictions where the regulators are tough, really tough. Whereas here, it just seems horrendous to me. And just, two anecdotes, you might have seen these, but what's her name? Can't remember her name. A journalist had a story in the Sydney Morning Herald about one of the IPART inquiries and pointed out that just how incredibly unfair and imbalanced and kind of illegitimate, really, the regulatory system here is. In that this one rule was being considered, I can't remember which one it was, going up to the, part-time commissioners, and a skeleton staff. The incumbents put in proposals arguing against the rule change, not because it was incredibly significant in itself, but it would be the thin edge of the wedge and a greater shift to, power of choice or whatever it was. And they submitted, I think she estimated something like 40 legal teams, law firms, 1.1 million pages of testimony within a guessed legal bill of $90 million. Now, I'm not saying corporations and ones that we own have no right to represent themselves, but that clearly doesn't work. That's broken. It's a broken system. So, like you, I fear that with the rush to privatisation, we lose a lot of the control over these things. And I guess the best we can do is perhaps a bit of a rearguard action to start telling people what they will lose if that happens. And part of it will be the story about their right to independently produce and manage their own power. And the other anecdote I wanted to put in was from a report about Brooklyn. And so I gather there's quite a big experiment going on there because there's a need to spend about $1 billion upgrading substations. And the regulators and the energy company and the network have realised that they can avoid a lot of this by using batteries and storage and some smarts. And so they're spending about $200 million on distributed battery and inverter and other kinds of technologies. But one of the things that was really funny is someone is also working on a system there through a community-owned enterprise to use Bitcoin encryption and somehow create this, and I could be getting this completely wrong, like a sub-market to the side of the energy market where we can secretly trade our energy used and not used. And I think there's probably an expert here who will be able to say, no, you're wrong. Yeah, but it seemed quite a remarkable idea. Please.
So it's actually funny that you mentioned that, because it's not exactly using Bitcoin as sort of the way of encrypting that. It's essentially putting 1 kilowatt of energy into a token and then allowing that token to move across a smart grid. So, Victoria and actually Australia is really good for this, is they've positioned streets and houses to be sort of parallel to sort of everything. So that block can essentially be its own smart grid. If every house had its own solar panels, its own battery storage, in the case of Tesla batteries, you're looking at getting at least 2 to 3 to power your house and essentially have energy left over that can be sold to your neighbour. That's on the proviso that it's on a smart grid. And that smart grid has to be linked into sort of mini blockchain, because essentially blockchain is just a way to distribute and then put in like output here, input there. Because I don't know if everyone knows, but the actual smart meters that you have connected to your house runs off a mesh radio network. Now it's not good for you, that's one thing, but it's just a way for the actual energy distributors and retailers to record how much energy you use and how much you put back into the grid. So if you could stop putting it back into the grid, storing it, and then maybe, who knows, down the track, a proper system becomes available, you can actually sell it to your neighbours, you know, because one person will have more roof space while someone might have minimal. So essentially you're creating a little community of energy sharing on a smart grid. I mean, how many times can you times that smart grid to cover the entire sort of land area?
Yeah, it's very interesting.
There's projects at the moment where they're testing like smaller grids and sharing energy across a blockchain little thing. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's very cool. So, some other questions, I'm sure. Some swapping of notes.
I think that Brooklyn one, New York's excluded the current incumbents from participating in those impact systems.
So, what does that mean?
Well, they've recognised that the current incumbents got this massive amount of political power and institutional power
Right.
in controlling the electricity grid. So if you want to be involved in renewables, the New York has excluded them. That's the state of New York from being involved. So you can either be the current system,
Right.
or if you want to invest in renewables, new business, not the same shareholders, not the same owners.
Well, I think, isn't there a similar rule issue here about ring fencing that they're considering changing, which is prohibiting restricting utilities' ability, restricting the distribution businesses from being able to set up large storage. I've seen some nods there. Does anyone know in detail what this is about?
Altering the rules for ring fencing so that networks can participate either through a third party or something like that in their non-core business of providing energy services and things like that. So it's currently in discussion with a whole bunch of other rules as well. Like there's the demand aggregation of energy storage. So you can aggregate thousands of houses together. You're effectively a 100 megawatt generator or something like that. So there's companies like Reposit Power trying to do that. And for all the things that Malcolm Turnbull talks about innovation, that's a prime example.
Yeah.
There's going to be all these new business models popping up, and we need that. Australia needs these startups to grow and develop, but the way the regulations and all the NGOs are structured, they're severely hamstrung by that. So if regulation doesn't catch up, then it's going to be a total mess, really.
Right, and I think Reposit's a really great example. So I mentioned that in the report because I think it's something that has great technical potential, but also it's a business and a concept that I feel like the Prime Minister will really understand. And in a way, it's a software business model leap, not a technological leap. They're just wiring the batteries together and using controllers and protocols that are there already. And it's great. I think it's really interesting, and they should be allowed to compete. If they can produce the power and the security and compete in the market, why protect the incumbents? For what? For what possible reason? I think there was a question second from back.
There was, but I just kind of lost my train of thought. I was just wondering.
Oh, ask another one. Then come back to it.
Now, to do with this aggregation of storage networks, I'm a little bit out of the loop of what's happening here in Australia, but the last couple of years I've been doing some research in building and working with they're software engineers, and they've created software and apps to create distributed aggregated storage networks. And my background initially in architecture, but now legal. And I've just done a master's in energy law. And my research was in the legal obstacles to future energy systems, and found that despite the fact that EU very different model into how they innovate, they have a lot of funds and grants that pushes not public sector, but I guess it's a here private sector seems to push innovation more than government-backed funds. But in the EU, there's a lot of money for startups to sort of innovate in these areas.
Right.
But there's a bit of a legal obstacle in how storage is defined. And I'm just wondering, you mentioned a court case earlier, and I'm finding that in the EU, sort of, I mean, energy is such a political and legal issue. Is there, and from a regulatory point of view, is there a definition of what storage is? Because in the EU, they're looking at it as being it's like a supply of energy. And that's actually putting an obstacle whether the DSOs or TSOs can be involved in it. And at the moment, they're wanting to push this, but there's this legal obstacle and definition of what storage is. And I'm just wondering what the situation is here.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I love pretending I can shoot from the hip as a lawyer. Yeah, very good question, councillor. I imagine that there's no definition in the regulations of what storage is. It's like a de facto definition of what you can trade and provide in the energy market. And so it's more that Reposit, I assume, isn't able to fully participate as a market entrant in, providing storage and demand services and frequency control and so on, which technically it is providing through its computer control of 1,000 Tesla Powerwalls. I'm not certain, but just to rewind, I think what you're working on is incredibly important. I think that the big barriers now aren't technological. I mean, as BZ has been saying, it's just learning by doing it. This stuff is getting cheaper and cheaper. I think the big roadblocks are going to be significantly in energy law and right in that detail of that sort of overlap of competition law and consumer law and prices and grid level management. So yeah, incredibly important.
Well, I guess just as a comment then, does anybody here that thinks sort of impact through policy, it's important to get at some point there will be a definition of it because it will be under a regulatory umbrella or somebody. So it's important to get that definition right because it's something that's ambiguous or it's. I'm just saying it can become battered in the courts. It can become a legal issue whether storage succeeds in a certain area or doesn't.
And look, I think BZE could really make a huge contribution in all of this debate, which I think. I mean, I take the point you were making before about how we don't want to just privatise everything, and I agree. I mean, I think I'm a sort of social democrat in my inclinations, but given the political situation, we've got two parties that are still under the sway of the whole neoliberal paradigm. They are very open to arguments about competition, and you've got one there, right there. I mean, you're just putting it. That what you're accusing the incumbents and the regulators of is protection of winners, and they tell us you can't pick winners or we can't possibly invest in solar, John Howard said. We can't pick a winner. Well, solar's winning, my friend. It's just technology. It's like saying we can't pick smartphones. I've still got a wind-up telephone here. I can't pick smartphones are here. And so the same with storage and all these ancillary services and so on can be provided. I think we just have to make the case that they are protecting for no reason other than it's the incumbents. Big coal power stations providing ancillary services that we can do better, cheaper. So, here, question.
Going back to your, one of the batteries, the storage mechanism.
The ACOM chart?
Yeah, I just want to understand that a bit better. The capacity down the bottom is fairly evident to me, and I'm interested in the response times and the discharge time on the side. Is there anything in that that's saying how fast they start up, or is it how long they run on the left axis there?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the report for a while. I think they put several caveats here. This is a schematic representation. So that's a log scale at the bottom. That makes sense because you've got this incredible distribution of energy potential from kilowatt to a gigawatt. I think on the left they're sort of giving a subjective, semi-quantitative measure. So it's a combination. I'm not the electrical engineer, but of discharge, ramp, response, cycle, recovery. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a combination of a few factors. Does that make sense? There must be some electrical engineers here who can correct me if I'm wildly wrong. I think that's what it is. And so, I imagine there's even quite a lot of variability. In fact, I was at a factory who are building a new battery system. They're getting built in Asia, and they're designing the battery management technology here and trying to come up with the best possible solution, blah, blah, blah. And it's all about, I think, optimizing life and safety and power rating for lithium-ion batteries based on sort of the range of things they have to do. Sorry, I'm really not the electrical engineer. But does that make sense? So it's a sort of...
I guess what jumped out is I would have thought pumped hydro might have a faster response. It's just sort of stuck out with the corner there as big and slow.
Right.
And that's what made me question the time axis.
Yeah, I mean, that did strike me as a bit odd. I mean, surely pumped hydro can start discharging really quickly. You would think it might be...
I think it's about 20 seconds.
20 seconds, really?
Yeah, for a small one.
It's the guy
to get up to full power.
Right.
And I think that's just the time it can deliver full power.
Right.
The vacuum systems, they respond in a second, capacitors shorter than a second. So it depends on how you structure your ancillary markets.
Right.
And Australia is split into, I forget how many markets, but they're in different response times. That's what bucket you fall in. And I think the shortest is 6 seconds.
Right.
But some other countries, like the US, in one of their grids, they're incentivizing batteries because they can respond in a second or thereabouts. So they put them into a different category.
Right.
And you need to install less batteries to provide the same sort of level of response.
Right, and that gets back to your energy law question. You know, if there are whole new categories of service we can deliver, we need to start pushing for them to be recognised and named them. And the incumbents will just be saying, well, there's no such thing.
Yeah, so at the moment, the fastest is 6 seconds for Australia, so there's no real incentive then to pick batteries over pumps or another technology like the gas turbine. I'm not sure how quickly that ramps up.
Right.
There's the way it's all structured.
Yeah, and I think that's just a really clear argument. You know, we ultimately win when we can appeal to governments through the sort of lens that they see everything through, as well as the facts. You know, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But you know, the thing that they'll respond to in Canberra at the moment is markets and innovation, and you've just made the case, right? So the technology's there, the innovation has happened. We can deliver a service better and cheaper. The market has to let that happen and stop protecting the incumbents to do an old thing. So we've got a good story to tell. Yes? Sorry, two.
There's a big emphasis on batteries, but in the big picture, isn't the answer to integrating renewables into the grid large-scale storage, hydro, perhaps compressed air, and things of that sort? Don't we need to push those things harder?
Yeah, look as well, absolutely. And, you know, we wanted to pick, to keep, you know, it's the first report on storage we've done, and pick something simple and clear. So I've emphasised, you know, distributed solar storage. All the larger grid-tied storage are incredibly important. And, you know, the other argument, which I think we need to make, which is crucial, is the smart grid itself, this sort of nebulous entity no one's quite sure how to define, is the most important thing. So, you know, I try to keep a little up with the technology, even though I'm not a technologist. And I was reading some paper about a microgrid. I think it might have literally been an island, and they had a wind turbine, diesel generators, small battery set, introduced some new computers and tried to optimise, you know, the running of this little micro grid. And it was incredible how reliable they could make it by just continually optimising things and fixing the SCADAs and reviewing the software and plugging in some of the data that comes out of the weather prediction systems now, you know, the wind forecasting and so on. And I think that's a great story to tell people. We need to find a simple way to tell it. But you don't need your whole grid backed up. I mean, this myth, the whole baseload myth, I think is part of what you're debunking. And, you know, BZE were the first people to say that. But baseload really is just a myth. It's a construct that we've created because it suits having a whole lot of brown coal that's relatively cheap at your doorstep. And so, you know, we've still got night electricity heaters. I mean, I tell people this and they're amazed. You know, what? I'm buying electricity at night because the coal station needed to sell at What? Like it just seems so old. So I think you're right that we need to talk about all these other parts of the spectrum. But also, I think even as we do that, we need to start explaining a completely different paradigm for what energy is. The Internet of Energy. And I think to anyone under about 40, it seems intuitive. Like I don't think it's going to seem like this heresy to say energy can be traded and managed very quickly with assets distributed across the whole grid, talking through computers, so on and so forth in real time.
You don't have to be under 40.
No, well, the imaginative people of all generations. Yes, a question there, third one.
Thanks, Dan. Question on the energy life cycle and the embodied energy of lithium-ion batteries in particular. And particularly in the current generation, what's the embodied energy and how rapidly is it paid back? I know that for solar panels, it's come to the point that it's over often in less than a year now, that it's paid for the embodied energy, or thereabouts, for a fully installed solar system. It's not a hugely consequential thing, but for batteries, is the embodied energy payback in their life cycle still?
Yeah, great question, I don't know. And yeah, good question.
I'm totally pro batteries, but it's just, to me, that's a really big question.
It is really important, and I think recycling of all the chemicals and the electrodes is an incredibly important thing. We should get in ahead of it. And also safety, just general safety, getting an understanding of, exothermic reactions and blah, blah, and standards. So yeah, great question. Should have the answer. Let's put that on notice.
Business plan said the batteries they believe are going to last for 25 years, useful life.
Right.
The problem was, for cars, it only had 7 years, and then they started deteriorating. So it was just they had come up with an industrial solution to insert them into cars.
Yep.
But in terms of the batteries, their whole business plan was 5-7 years the batteries had paid for themselves. And then they'd take them out to wind farms or solar farms.
Right.
That was their business plan.
Right.
They just couldn't solve the first 7 years part problem.
Yeah.
But from the battery point of view, and all their work, and that was, remember that's now, 10 years ago in their place.
Yeah.
They'd already solved it. They said, no, it's all there. And including that embedded cost, it was well and truly paid for in that time.
Yeah, and I gather that there's already a business doing this, buying old batteries and using the power battery as an energy battery. It's a great idea. But yeah, I think the environmental footprint overall is it's crucial, and we need to get ahead of it. I don't know the answers to those things.
I think that's one that's important for us collectively to
Very.
get across, because we don't want it to be one that someone somewhere fights us with it.
Right. And when you look at the Lazard report, the first one on storage, the LCOS1, they're asking slightly philosophically, what is storage? We know what levelized cost of energy is, but what's LCOS exactly? What is a stored kilowatt hour, and how do you pay for it, and how do you measure it? But just one other thing, I'm gathering that a lot of the flow battery chemistry is much more benign, and you can, according to the manufacturers, really recycle a lot of some of the flow batteries. And that, again, is another reason why I'm really interested in those. So vanadium redox and a couple of the others, I gather, are pretty environmental, potentially. I think there's a question up the back that I was... Yeah, yes.
Has there been anything done, what's always useful in these situations, to look at a greenfield and say, if you're starting from scratch, how would you do things? Did you look at anything like that to sort of inform some of this research? Like a lot of people talk about, okay, how do we transition from a fossil fuel based, very centralised grid to something?
So looking at an ideal grid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I didn't. But I think, there's a great quote from Herman Daly, who was the ecological economist who worked ironically for the World Bank, who was asked at some point, I think after he retired, what it really meant to transition to a fully sustainable global economy. And he said, it's like, and he came up with a metaphor, maybe off the cuff, He said, it's like getting everyone out of one helicopter into the other helicopter while the helicopters are flying in a storm. And I think that's probably overly generous and optimistic. No, I think we're sort of bootstrapping as we go, obviously, because we've got this huge system that was built for all sorts of the wrong reasons. But it would be really great to have a great model of that. I don't know how much work it takes to do that kind of thing, to model infrastructure level, you know, dream energy system from scratch. I mean, I just don't know. Does someone know if that's doable or has been done?
There was a project called 51st State in the United States. I think I forget which organisation it was. Somebody may know something about it. Where they attempted to do something like that.
It wasn't Stanford.
No, I think it was an industry association. It wasn't a university.
Right.
But yeah, I guess it's more about a rhetorical sort of device, isn't it? To say, well, this is how it could work, and to sort of use it to sort of counter some of the arguments around the energy incumbents who say it can't be done, and
right.
Well, we need to have, you know, we need to ring fence all of these services and provide them with, you know, a regulated return, or else, you know, the network's going to fall.
Armageddon.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point.
Some like developing nations where, you know, there was the argument through energy poverty that they had to have a centralised system. You know, sort of places like Africa, you're seeing decentralised networks being built where there wasn't anything before.
So if they successfully leapfrog, then
they're starting that out. They haven't got the transition issue that you alluded to.
Right.
Getting from the two helicopters.
And that's an amazing good news story, isn't it? I was trying to organise interviews with a couple of the companies from the US who are doing this, you know, really remote microgrid solar and battery system in Tanzania and Kenya and a couple of other countries. And that is an amazing good news story. And suddenly VC money is rushing in. I saw one of them got a C-series $40 million or something subscription, you know, which is incredible. I mean, this seemed like really science fiction stuff, I think, not long ago. And it's going gangbusters because people are just going straight from, you know, no light or diesel to smart grids that we don't have.
Even India has got some elements of that occurring.
Right, and so people are doing that right off the edge of the grid, yeah? Yeah, very interesting, I agree. And, you know, in the same way, you know, I think people have talked in technology evolution, you know, studies of how, you know, parts of the developing world have gone from, you know, no phones to smartphones. And from through the smartphones, no banking to banking, that's internet, entirely branched as internet banking. And even through SMS protocols and so on.
Yeah, but no landlines. So
right, no landlines, yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, here.
We have actually been doing that type of thing in Australia for a while. Because a lot of people who want to build a home, for instance, in remote locations, and they get a quote from the power company to connect them.
Right.
And it's completely unrealistic compared to the cost they have to pay to create and store their own renewables. And that's been happening for a while. I know of instances where customers have been quoted $75,000, and for 25 to 30,000 they can put themselves in a pretty up to the mark solar system with enough storage to operate that modern home. You know, so the power companies are they're doing themselves out of the market they already didn't want to be in. So that's in this country.
And there's a great story here about the telecom repeater stations as well.
Yeah.
I mean, they were out there with, you know, early generation silicon photovoltaics, running repeaters out the back of nowhere.
Everywhere.
40 years ago.
Sure.
It's a great story that's never really been told, I think. Yeah.
My view is that you've got enormous barriers through the utilities, and they are sitting on what will be wasted assets, a bit like the coal, but maybe differently.
Yeah.
And should we be working out strategically what those barriers to entry for this technology are, and ways in the tax system and otherwise to make it easier and economic for the barrier people, the utilities and so forth, to actually retire assets that are a bar to adoption of this technology full scale.
Right. Well, did you see Ross Garner recently saying we have to write down the value of all the networks substantially? Yeah, big political question. Good one.
Does the community have an obligation to help them write those asset values down and absorb the value drop through the community to accelerate this technology and stop the barriers?
Yeah, great question. And, you know, for the privatised networks, you know, do they just have to wear it? Do they just have to wear the loss of value? I mean, you look in America...
They made the decision.
They did. And
they had the depreciation over 40 years, you know, of the assets they're running.
Right.
Come on.
Yeah, I agree. And there was a paper that we put out several years ago by Dave Richardson looking at depreciation and saying, you know, they should introduce a new depreciation schedule for renewable energy.
Yeah.
And particularly all these fast-moving things like storage and statcoms and so on. Like that you know, that 10-year assets, not 40-year assets.
That's right. But
I can't remember what the schedule is.
The community's already paid for it in a way.
Well,
through depreciation.
If it's your SCCV and so on, we've paid for it multiple times, haven't we?
That's right.
It's absolutely ours.
I'm interested in the international experience in that, maybe from Germany, because if I remember correctly, some of their distribution grids were privatised and then have actually been bought back by local councils and things like that.
True.
Yeah. I only heard the last bit of it in a television article.
Germany has a huge number of distribution.
Some of which were privatised and then brought back.
Exactly. It was to the local council.
They've got a name for energy.
Right. So, and Berlin didn't happen, but some smaller places did. Is that correct?
It's not Berlin, but it's the Germany's incredibly the municipal councils have a lot of power.
Yeah.
And they run them.
Right.
So and therefore, yeah, they can do
The US is doing the Rocky Mountain. Had an article on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So local buybacks of...
in terms of the Swedish.
Yeah, interesting. And, you know, community-owned assets, I think it's a great idea. You know, I mean, it's been proven to work in wind and, you know, and solar to a lesser extent. Of course, it could work in grids. Perfect.
But they can buy more assets because they pay a lower interest rate because it's a bulk purchase. I mean, yeah,
right. Well, governments can borrow almost nothing at the moment on the bond rate. Time to build some infrastructure.
One barrier to entry is the current annual electricity bills in Australia is $10 billion. They ain't going to give up $10 billion of cash flow. That's the biggest barrier to entry.
Yeah.
From $10 billion, $100 billion to a political party to run certain political lines.
It's a big industry. Moving energy is a big one. So I think another one.
Yeah. Don't you think this is the role of your organisation? Like, if you combine the last four comments, and if you have a good understanding of the legal implications and the structure of the NEM, you know that we need an almost revolution in the way the ownership and distribution of the assets that are at play here get reorganised. Now that may, as the gentleman at the front said, it may rely on us actually subsidising them out of the assets they currently own. But as an organisation like your own, to sit back and suggest that the Africans and the people who haven't already built a power grid need to be responsible for an innovation framework so that we can learn from them, when all we're really talking about is removing incumbent power and vested interests. Isn't that what the Australian Institute's for?
Yeah.
That's what they're for. You should be calling for the rebuilding of the electricity market, not worrying about whether or not which battery's worth one or which one's worth another. This is a rebuild required. The longer we take, the less progress we'll make.
Yeah, look, I think that's on the agenda now. You know, the Labor Party in their platform included a rewrite of the National Energy Objective, which, you know, a lot of us have been talking about for years. And I think you're right. Let's go for the big root and branch reform. But at the same time, I think it's really important to talk about individual technologies and sort of interest collisions like solar storage, because they give you a simple message people can start to understand. But yeah, I agree. We should reinvent the whole energy system straight away.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit more of a comment, but it's interesting to see the parallels
between what people are saying here with the with Uber and the taxi market, where you've got this government control monopoly, which is sort of privatised in a way where taxi owners own their license plates or whatever. But now we're moving to a different stage where the newcomers come in and taking over this market share. It's actually quite interesting. I was interested because obviously New South Wales has come up with a model where they're compensating taxi drivers, so they're compensating the existing players, I guess. It'll be interesting to see that sort of thing flows into this area.
Oh, look, I mean, they're scared to, they're scared to unleash competition in energy. We know this. They're protecting coal not just because they're, they don't get the climate science or they're worried about, upsetting the coal company. They can see that there's now competitors, real competitors. So, yes.
In Victoria, we've got smart meters.
Smartish.
Well, they're smartish because they're not used properly.
Yeah, they're not.
I just think, going back to my experience in the EU, there's a real push for smart meters over there. And the first step is smart meters. We've had them here in Victoria, and they're just used to the benefit of the utilities.
And that's a classic example, isn't it? So that was a reasonably substantial investment quite a few years ago when it was a newish technology. And that really was vastly underutilised and mismanaged. Vastly.
I think we had a story. We had somebody in this discussion group a couple of years ago from Switch Automation who worked on a building, a new building, and they partnered with Lendlease, and they went as far as installing their own smart meters. There was 2 smart meters for every premises, so they could add smart features that people could see inside their own homes. They wanted to add that in the building, but they had to put second smart meter hardware just so they could give the people in the building there that benefit. So that's how far someone's gone.
Demand management now is hugely underutilised.
Hugely, and I mean that's a perfect case study, really of the problem, isn't it? That the industry is set up to sell as much energy as possible. Essentially, it's a moral hazard situation, right? Sure. So it's in their interests to make you waste as much electricity as possible. And it's just a side effect that you'll trash the planet. Like, that's not what they really want. They don't really care about it, but what they really want is for you just to waste as much electricity as possible. And, even a slight change to the National Energy Objective, you would think would cascade down into then things like smart meters being used to actually do smart things like waste a bit less energy.
Yeah, but also with that you need time to use pricing, which requires regulatory changes that we haven't seen either. So it does get back to this dramatic need for quite substantial change on a number of fronts.
Yeah.
Not just the technology being available.
Yeah, the whole price structure of the market is wrong.
You can't overlook the fact here that I've nominated a figure of 30 or 50 years' time, that the grid itself will be redundant. We'll have technology so that we can generate enough energy at the point where it's going to be used in pretty well every situation.
Oh, really? No interconnection.
So that, in any sort of grid is above and beyond your own environment, your own home or factory or whatever, is not required. And therefore that takes the whole sort of the corporate structure out of the equation. And I think that's probably where we're going to end up. So what we're discussing now about distribution issues, I think will one day become a redundant issue.
Look, and that could be partially right, but I guess I feel that there's a bit of an anarchist sentiment in the energy debate. For good reason. The energy companies have been horrendously greedy and selfish and not cared about our common future that we share through a safe climate. And wanting just to get rid of them and smash them and unplug is something I can completely sympathise with. But, I guess the more conservative or social democrat voice in my head says, it's good to be connected. It's good to have socially used and designed assets. Democracy is the least worst option. And getting together and saying, let's have roads, let's have a school and a hospital, let's have a grid, is a great thing, even if you could all be fully independent. And I'm not the technologist, you could know far more than I and know that that's really plausible. But even thinking of the batteries people are plugging in now because they're losing their feed-in tariffs and so on, you look at the predictions from AEMO, they're saying it's possible in the higher scenario that there'll be 40% penetration of battery storage by, was it 2030 or 2035? You know, with no subsidies and no changes to the NEO and so on and so forth. The idea that that's going to happen and not be fully compensated as a shared resource through things like stack service accounting, and that some of those people, millions even, might be unplugging. Like, I get the, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore, totally, and I don't denigrate people who feel that, but I just think if we're going to spend $15 billion on Powerwalls, the idea that we're all just going to hoard that benefit and not share it, and therefore underuse A, the financial investment, but B, as you were saying, the environmental investment in the alloys and the chemicals in the electrolytes and so on, just sort of really irritates me. And so I'm not putting down the urge for people just to unplug and, you know, good on you if that's what you do, but I just feel really torn. Do you know?
I wasn't necessarily looking at it from a cultural point of view. It's more just a purely technological.
Right, it could be.
And I mean, one of the greatest issues we've got that we don't often talk about is the losses through distribution.
True.
If you want to generate power down to Vermont and ship it up to Melbourne, well, there's not a hell of a lot left by the time it gets here.
Right.
So that's the sort of stuff that localised production addresses.
Well, I was talking to someone who works for Ergon, and they were saying they've got 40% losses out to some of the sewer lines, and they've got the biggest sewer network in the world. Would that be right? The longest, thinnest? I mean, that's, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
They're starting to use batteries.
They are.
In Queensland, going in along their sewer networks, because without subsidies, it's a more cost-effective solution. So
right, already.
It's already starting to happen, and the networks, in certain applications, they're the best solution.
Yeah, already. Yeah, very interesting.
But that's where your microgrids go first, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think...
I mean, it's logical.
Yeah, it would make sense, you know, back to the first question, that if the energy rules define these benefits and services properly, then even in the, you know, where the horse is bolted and we've got privatised networks already just making decisions to maximise shareholder value, they will very well jump on making the most money, and that'll be the microgrids.
And mining companies, I mean, mining sites.
They're on it. Yep, they're heading there. And the other big omission, because there were a lot of emissions. I mean, this, as I said, it took 10 days of research and writing to get to the first draft, and you would know more than anyone how big energy is and complicated. So it's a small little, you know, throw into the pond. But the other big thing missing from this was transport, and that's a huge part of the equation, which I think just makes this all much, much better. And EVs and use of you know, new kinds of biofuels for aeroplanes and so on, all of that stuff is absolutely crucial to getting the value out of storage and the related smart grid tech. So yeah, big caveat about this report, and maybe it'll be another report. Maybe Mark will help me write some amazing report on EVs. Another question.
The VZE EV report comes out in 10 days or something.
Oh well, that'll be the Bible.
It's on the 12th. Yeah.
I'll study it in depth. Yeah, no, crucial.
At the moment.
crucial stuff.
It seems to me that the grid we should be disconnecting from is the gas grid, not the electricity grid.
Right.
And what concerns me is that a lot of people who want to disconnect from the electricity grid will then be dependent on gas for heating, cooking and so on.
Yeah.
So I feel that this push for getting off the grid is heading the wrong way. It's the wrong grid we should be getting off.
Right. Yeah, that's another huge issue. And recently we had the gas company putting down new pipes, and we had a slight debacle because they cut off the water, and I said, "You cut off the water?" And they said, "Coincidence." Right. Well, yeah, really? So I gave him my business card and said, "Why don't you check it out, and in half an hour give us a call and confirm that I'm completely wrong and that there was a coincidence." There was not a coincidence. But the first question when I saw that calling card saying they were doing this, why are we vastly investing in the gas distribution grid now as if there's going to be this rush? And the guys doing it lovely, the engineers, and they were very sorry for cutting off grandma's water and so on, and said, "Oh, we'll be able to put," and I can't remember what it was, 20 times the volume through the pipes. And I'm like, you're going to be selling 20 times as much gas to who? Who in Carlton North is going to be buying 20 times as much gas? Assuming we don't have 20 times as many people, which I think is equally unlikely. So yeah, I agree. Like the gold plating of the gas network seems bonkers.
Well, worked on the gas networks, but it's all about lowering the cost of maintaining the network. That's why high pressure gas is just astronomically less than what it is with low pressure gas.
Oh, is that the driver? Okay, I'm corrected. Okay. It was not about increasing the volume, it's purely maintenance costs.
It's about increasing the volume too.
Right, I stand corrected. Okay, that makes sense. But I think to your point, I really agree, and I think there's so much ignorance about gas and the fact that it's going up in price. When you talk to people who say, you know, oh, should I get a Tesla Powerwall, and how does energy work? And you start asking questions about, oh, you've got gas heaters and you don't have insulation and never check for drafts, and you start talking about where gas prices are heading, and they're just flummoxed. They have no idea. But gas is cheap. Oh, okay.
A couple more questions.
Sure. Sorry?
Try convincing a lot of people with LP gas. They say, oh, LP gas is very cheap. Yes, mate, but you're using a lot of it.
Right.
It's from an energy point of view, it's not a solution, really.
Yeah, the gas bridge. You need to go all over the gas bridge. Save climate.
It's first.
I'd like to make a couple of comments. I back you up about anarchy. I do not have a smart grid or a smart meter. I live in Camberwell. I put a lock behind it. They sent me a bunch of nasty letters, and I told them to shove it. And I put a PI lock on it just to see if they pay attention, because they have the key to it. They just never check. It's very bizarre. And last week I had a meeting with a couple of companies around our new three-letter communication government rollout company. And a lot of the infrastructure that's needed to get this thing out, there's no grid there. So I'm hoping, in a way, that the whole comms rollout will be bolted onto a power PR concept, where they can say we get reliable power, enough power to run telecoms in places where there's no grid at all. So that's kind of a cart and horse dynamic that's happening, which if it can be solved with, you know, PV and batteries in a real life, real infrastructure situation, I think getting that message out there would be a good thing as well.
Okay, so you mean NBN rollout?
That's it.
No. Next question.
Just back on this gas, Keith's question about that, and several comments on the gas. I remember a few years ago hearing Matthew Rudd suggesting, and I have no idea how much it was a joke or how feasible it is, but converting the gas network to a recycled water network.
What, using the pipes for something else? No, I
just sort of filling them with gas, fill them with reclaimed water.
No idea. Don't know.
It's lateral thinking.
Maybe. Bitcoins. Roll them down. Isn't that how they work? You roll them down the pipe? That's what I heard.
Yeah, one more.
Dan, to what extent is renewable energy and storage likely to be an export industry for Australia? You said earlier that these were manufactured in China using Australian technology. Is that the way it would go industrially for Australia?
Oh, look, great question. I think, that's a whole separate agenda that the Australia Institute pursues around manufacturing policy and, the fact that we all swallowed the sort of mad free trade neoliberal extreme version of economics, which said that, our comparative advantage was, all the smarts, and China had the comparative advantage of all the people, and so they'll make everything and we'll innovate. It didn't work. The dream's over. And, I think, again, I've got a piece, hopefully, that New Matilda will run soon, where I'm suggesting, along with someone else, that this whole collapse of the neoliberal dream and the rise of extremism we're seeing with Trump and Brexit, and this crazy emotive xenophobic politics, is all based on real-world experience that the economic system is not delivering the stability and the equity that it promises or it should. To me, building renewables, manufacturing a lot of it, and then installing and building and maintaining is a way to fix a lot of these problems all at once. It will help fix the climate. It will help fix the energy system, which doesn't work. It just seems to work because people believe gas and coal are cheap, but they're getting ripped off to an incredible extent. But also it means jobs, and through that I think it gives us a political legitimacy that we need. And you know, the job intensity of distributed renewables, as we know, is vastly higher than the job intensity of legacy centralised conventional power. So, you know, for me as a 25-year plus environmentalist, we've been stuck behind jobs versus the environment for 1 or 2 generations. We've lost a lot of time. We have some left, not a lot. And to me, the thing that makes renewables so exciting, and I think, you know, BZE championed this in its messages around the stationary energy report. You know, you saw this early on, that jobs versus the environment impasse, it's broken. It's a lie. It's nonsense. It's absolute drivel. Repowering the world on clean energy equitably with a lot of community ownership and so on, and competitively with more competition against old incumbent technologies, will create millions and millions of jobs and change the manufacturing structure of economies around the world. It's an incredibly good message. You know, we no longer have a conflict between what we need for the planet and what we want as a society and an economy. It's one and the same thing. Whether we can get a lot of that manufacturing here, I'm sure we can. It's a matter of public will and political follow-through. I mean, of course we can. You know, I spoke to one big company here, so a big privately held company who've owned different kinds of manufacturing over the years. And I said, you know, surely if any of this happens, it'll all be happening in China. And they said, no, it won't. If we really thought there was a boom in these technologies, we would absolutely look at manufacturing something here, because there's all these other benefits of the political system and the workforce and, you know, the interest rates and so on and so forth. So, you know, it's not my area of expertise, manufacturing policy, but I'm an optimist, and I think it should surely be possible here. We could be making the technologies, the hardware, and also the intelligent and interesting and emerging software and business and financial models that sit behind them. So, hopefully, yes.
A great way to leave it. So, thanks, Dan. Please join us to continue the discussion if you like at the Second Flight Hotel, just a couple of doors down in the pub.
Good idea.
If you'd like to come for a meal and a drink. Also, just a quick plug for baseload support. We at BZE rely on our baseload supporters to provide funding for all the things like this and the continuing research we do. So if you like what we do and you've signed up, please consider becoming a baseload supporter. Our CEO, Stephen Bygrave, will be a panellist at a theatre event called Creating a Climate for Change, presented by the Melbourne Playback Theatre Company and the Darabin Climate Action Now. That's going to be happening on Thursday week, the 11th of August at 7 p.m. So please pick up a flyer. There's a couple outside as you leave. You can also catch up with all of these kinds of clips on YouTube. Just go to our site at bze.org.au and you can find out more. So please do that. And as was mentioned earlier, the EV report will be launching very soon as well. So that's new research by BZE, which is participating and contributing to that debate as well. So thank you very much. The next discussion group will be on the 5th of September. This is the venue. We're not sure on who the presenter will be yet, but keep your eyes peeled and we'll let you know. Thank you very much.